Science Department. Welcome to this lecture, Black Health and Wellness, Understanding Your Civil Rights in this Era. This is a special event for the Political Science Department because we are in the second week of Black History Month. And we do celebrate Black History Month here at Morgan. But the theme for this year's Black History Month is Black Health and Wellness. And the theme is intended to celebrate the contributions and breakthroughs of Black professionals, as well as addressing the cultural richness of non-traditional health and wellness practitioners. Civil rights is a health and wellness issue. Our speaker, Dr. Marvin Cheatham, will teach us on Black health and wellness, understanding your civil rights in this era. Dr. Cheatham has 2 radio shows, and he is a frequent host and guest on the Larry Young Morning Show. Most mornings when I'm coming to work, I listen to this show as I drive up, and I'm always amazed at the breadth and depth of the discussions Dr. Cheatham presents to the listeners. I remember one morning, as I was driving up, he was informing the listeners of the 14 urgent issues relating to the state of Maryland and which should be brought to the attention of the Maryland Legislative Black Caucus. Dr. Cheatham reviewed each issue and recommended that listeners get a copy of the list so they would be well versed when speaking with their legislative control. He gave out his email address and indicated that anyone who wanted a copy should send him an email. So I sent him an email a few days later, and within minutes of my request, the list was in my mailbox. The list was very thorough and ranged from food deserts, statewide inclusion of the civics and African American history curriculum in Baltimore City schools, mental health of the incarcerated, pipeline to prisons, redistricting, and many more. And it was then that I decided our students at Morgan need to hear from this Cheatham. And I sent him an email, and he graciously agreed to come. And I was really surprised because years ago when I came to Morgan, he was the director of the Board of Elections. And I called and said, I want to have my students be registering folks to vote. And he said, he's so busy. So when he said yes, I was so elated. Sean Yost, a senior reporter for the Afro-American newspaper, called him a stalwart presence in Baltimore's civil rights community for decades. Dr. Cheatham is retired, but remains very active. It is an honor to have him here today. He wears many hats. He is the past president of Baltimore City Election Board, the first Black president of Maryland Association of Election Officials, and Dr. Cheatham has registered more voters than anyone else in the state of Maryland. So please welcome Dr. Marvin Cheatham, Baltimore's baby boomer civil rights servant leader. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. I hope I don't talk too loud, but I'm accustomed to being an athlete, so I'm used to talking loud. So hopefully, if I'm a little too loud, don't say, Doc, I'm lower it down a little bit. It is indeed an honor to have received the splendid invitation from Dr. Allison Jackson, PhD, and interim and professor of political science here at Morgan State University. Yes, I am a Coppinite from Coppin State University with an honorary PhD from Sojourner Douglas College, which is now closed. But I gotta say this, if I had my druthers, we won't say how long ago it was, but I wanted to be a Morgan State Bear so bad. I played high school football here in Baltimore. We won't say how long ago it was, but anyone who wanted to do anything back in those days, you wanted to come to Morgan because Morgan had an outstanding football team. And that's the only reason that I'm a Coppinite as opposed to a Morganite. I couldn't get a football scholarship to come here. Matter of fact, many of us couldn't get one. And I was a quarterback, not too bad, but there was a quarterback better than me, and he became a member of the Ten Bears. The Ten Bears was a lacrosse team here at Morgan State University, and Miles Harrison, who is a medical doctor now, played on the Ten Bears, and I didn't feel bad when he didn't get a scholarship to play here. I didn't feel bad because I said, well, Miles was a little better than I was, so I said, well, if Miles didn't get a scholarship, I don't feel so bad. So I want y'all to know I have a love for Morgan State University, and I guess it really started that I really fell in love with Morgan is when in the year 2006 we decided privately to have a class action lawsuit against Maryland Higher Education Commission, and there were private meetings. I won't say where the private meetings were, but as a result of that, a lawsuit was decided. I'm sad that I wasn't able to be a plaintiff in that because I had already filed another class action lawsuit in the city of Baltimore dealing with illegal arrest against the mayor of the city of Baltimore, who was then Mayor Martin O'Malley. So I wanted to wear the orange and blue. I have confessed, but I do wear blue and white quite often. I am a Phi Beta Sigma, so don't hold that against me. But I will say that I was very active and continue to be active with reference to what happens here at our four HBCUs, Morgan, Coppin, Bowie, and of course UMES. When I was with the NAACP, of course, the color was blue and yellow, so blue goes through my vein, and as my fraternity brothers say, that I bleed blue. So it's the Morgan blue, the Coppin blue, the Sigma blue, but I will say I'm not a Morganite, but I love Morgan State University. My hope is, one, to briefly talk about voting rights, something that I hope that would be very important to our students here. I will say that I registered to vote on January 1, 1971. And why is that date important? It's important to me in the sense that that was the first day of the first month of the first year that I would have become eligible to register to vote. Back in 71, you had to be 21. So I made certain that on the first day of the year of 71 that I registered to vote, and even my voter's card today says 1/1/71. Sadly enough, 6 months later, the United States moved the voting age back from 21 to 18, and boy was I mad. I waited all this time to register to vote, and they moved the voting age back. And I received my inspiration to register to vote as a teenager. I was in New Jersey. I was at a convention. I had to stand in line, and I'm up here standing in line with all of these people standing in line to meet a lady. And I'm saying, she's not a football player, she's not a baseball player. Why am I standing in line to meet this lady? When I finally got there, she said, well, young man, you seem to be a young teenager, and I was. I said, well, I have a question for you. What is it that I can do? I said, I now know who you are, and I'll tell you who she was in a minute. And she said, well, when you get old enough, I want you to register voters. The name of the person was Fannie Lou Hamer. I made a pledge to Miss Hamer as a teenager that I would register people to vote, and I kept that pledge to Miss Hamer. I celebrate her birthday October the 6th of every year, and I basically try to educate people about this woman who got sick and tired of being sick and tired, and she was my inspiration. So I don't take credit for registering more people. I just say that my inspiration came from Fannie Lou Hamer. Maryland is a tough state historically when it comes to voting rights, and that's one of the issues I would like for you to come away with. The reason I say that Maryland is a tough state, when you look at how African Americans, blacks, Negroes, whatever you want to call us, how we receive our right to vote, it was through what they call ratification, the vote. But that's one of 3 areas that Maryland has been very, very tough when it comes to registering to vote. In the year 2001, I had started registering voters, and I realized that I was trying to register voters, but at the same time, I was approaching and being approached by individuals, and much to my amazement, they were telling me I can't register to vote. And I'm saying, what do you mean you can't register to vote? And one year we registered, I would say 22,000 within about 3 or 4 months. I had a real good committee. And what it dawned on me was that I was working backwards. That I was trying to register voters, and I was turning away more people than I could register. And I was very selective as to who I was trying to register. I went into neighborhoods that I basically knew were somewhat disappointed with the election process, having various challenges, whether it would be health, education. But I went into areas that I knew it would be a challenge to register them. But I was up for the task of registering the vote. And so what I decided in 2001, I decided to form a group, because one of the other things that Maryland did very poorly, it basically did not allow former felons the right to vote. And I'm saying, God, that's it's unfair. That you pay your debt to society in most cases, and you come back out. And what I found about Maryland, you could not register to vote. So in 2001, I formed an organization to address that. It was called the Maryland Voting Rights Restoration Coalition. And we were relatively successful. It took us about 6 or 7 years to get our first bill passed. But what I learned in forming that organization, that Maryland was having its struggles, its problems, but the state of Florida was doing worse than we were. That there were some states that were identified that the citizens, if they had done something, we won't say how bad it was, but it did something and they had to serve a sentence for it, they lost their right to vote. But in Florida, it was even worse. You could be a barber, a dentist, a plumber, and in Florida, the rules were so stringent that you would not only lose the right to vote, but if you were a barber, you could lose your barber's license. If you were a plumber, you would lose your plumber's license. And when Florida heard that we had formed an organization with 5 different national organizations to address what we call disenfranchisement, that means basically that you're not able to register to vote, Florida flew me into Florida. Mind you, I had never been to Florida before. I really liked the warm weather there. I thought I should have stayed there, but I decided to come back home. But I was one of the speakers in 2001 in Florida, and I was brought back in 2002. And basically, I was encouraging people who lived in Florida, I think they called them Floridians, that I encouraged them to do what other states were doing, was to register voters and find a way to pass laws to actually get people to register to vote. And ironic enough, I was so delighted to have gotten this invitation, especially being a Copperite and being invited to Morgan. So y'all don't hold that against me now. It wasn't my fault. I wanted to come to Morgan. But what was interesting to me was that there's so much that needs to be done in so many states, and the laws are different in every state. But here it was, I was going to meet a candidate that's running for governor on Sunday, so I'm listening to talk radio because I do talk radio. And lo and behold, I'm hearing this guy, John Legend, what's the name? John Legend was talking about a program that he started in Florida. Well, he didn't start it, he was basically revitalizing it. And it was that group that I went to see 20 years ago, the Florida Restoration Coalition. And that was the group that I helped to start them in Florida. And John Legend was talking about the challenges that his mother had and that she had lost the right to vote. And John Legend, I really like this guy's voice. He's a real good singer. At least I think he's a good singer. And Legend was talking about what he was doing. And this was this past Sunday. And he said, you know what, I got to meet John Legend. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I got to meet him because I need to share with him that this is something that I worked on 20 years ago. Mind you, most of the organizations that I have been president of paid nothing, paid $0, but I felt very honored to have done such. One of the national leaders said something to me. Matter of fact, he called me up one day. I had been the president first of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And mind you, I did not volunteer to run for any of these groups that I'm going to share with you. But I was the voter person for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which was founded by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Of course, I wasn't president when he was, because he had already passed away when I became local president. And the president actually had some family problems, and I accidentally became the president. It wasn't a position that I aspired for. And while I was president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, I got recruited to become president of the NAACP. My claim to fame with the NAACP was when I was there, out of 1,400 what we call adult branches, we were given the #1 title of the best branch in the country. So I tell folks my claim to fame was that I had the #1 branch in the nation for the NAACP. But I decided to do something very unintelligent. I decided to run for political office, and I knew that I was so controversial being with the NAACP, I needed to resign from the NAACP so people wouldn't think I was trying to do something political. So I resigned from the NAACP and let someone else take over the presidency, and I ran for office and I lost. But I get a phone call one day and they say, well, my name is Reverend Charlton. I say, yes, and who else do you want me to think that you're somebody else? He said, no, this is really Reverend Charlton. And Reverend Charlton recruited me and I became president of the National Action Network. So I'm one of the crazy people in the United States that has been the president of 3 civil rights groups, and none of them paid a cent. But I always tell folks your rewards come later in life, and you may not know the rewards that you get. But I say all of that to say that voting is important. And Maryland did, not only the blacks got the ratification late, not only did people who had committed a crime got voter registration late, but women. When women got the right to vote, Maryland was one of the last states in the United States that ratified women getting the right to vote. So I've seen the history of Maryland being very challenging, and I don't mind admitting when I took over the election board for Baltimore City, it was as a result of a woman running. Her name was Mary Conaway, and on the night of the election, you have what's called unofficial election results. What you see on election night, at least in the state of Maryland, are never official election results. The election results don't even get counted until normally 10 days after the election. What you get are unofficial election results. And on that night, when Mary Conaway first ran, she was the registered wills, they had announced that she had lost. And I had done my little bit of homework, and I said, the data does not seem right. I'm looking at the data coming in from the various election places, and I said, my records are showing that she won. And of course, we had an emergency meeting of the leadership in Baltimore City, and we had devoted to, we were going to challenge the election. And fortunately, the director of the election board came on TV the next day and admitted they had made a mistake, and Mary Conaway had actually won the election. And what I was told to do then by a former congressman, his name was Kern Mitchell, he said, well, Doc Cheatham, we got a job for you. I said, oh Lord, here goes another job. And what they indicated to me, I needed to become the president of the city election board. I did become the president, and I did become the first president that was African American to run the Maryland Association of Election Officials. We really need some young, intelligent, articulate folks to get into the election field, because some real bad things can happen in elections if you're not careful and cautious. So I'm saying all that to say that voting is very important, and these are probably some of the most challenging times that we have had dealing with voting. I'm very disappointed that the two voting bills in the United States Senate and Congress have not gone through. I'm very disappointed that the Supreme Court is beginning to turn back the hands of time. I'm one of the few people that think we need to increase the Supreme Court by at least 2 people, because I think the Supreme Court that we have now is going to do us some great injustices. I want to touch on very briefly Black history. And what I attempted to do in the area of Black history was try to get organizations, including the one that I was the national officer for, which was Phi Beta Sigma. I used the fraternity to write in the Black Collegian magazine, and I don't know whether that magazine is still being used today or not. But I wrote an article, and ironically enough, it was 20 years ago. And it was the proposal to celebrate Black history every month. And one of the documents that I think I put in your little package was the cover of what I was suggesting to the United States. And that was, I was suggesting that that the 19th of every month would be considered a date when you could actually celebrate and learn something about the history of African Americans. And I'm happy to say that article still was on the internet. I was kind of surprised that 20 years later it was still there. What I decided as a result of the idea that I had about celebrating Black history every month, I said it didn't go quite far enough. So what I decided to do was something different, and this is, I guess, one issue I could probably be debated upon. But when I look at civil rights and I look at Black history, and I can't say I'm a historian, but I have studied enough history that I tell folks in the city of Baltimore or the greater Baltimore metropolitan area, I contend Baltimore City has the greatest leaders in 3 areas of civil rights. And that is litigation, legislation, and leaders. Litigation, legislation, and leaders. If you look at the history of civil rights, yes, there were some great states and some great states and counties that dealt with civil rights. But when you look at those 3 areas, litigation, legislation, and leaders, I contend there is no state there is no city in the United States that has contributed more to civil rights than Baltimore. So that might be one of your challenges. If I ever get a chance to come back, maybe one of the students becomes a professor and we can possibly debate. I love debating. I do it quite often on the radio. I think I win most times, but I lose a couple of times. But I think that's an issue that I would love for the students to consider looking at: litigation, legislation, and leaders. Whether there's any city or any state that introduced more bills, passed more legislation, had more leaders than Baltimore City. So that's a personal statement made by Doc Cheatham, and I may catch holy heck for actually making that statement. One of the documents that I actually have there as well was the Afrocentric coverage of my suggestion dealing with African Americans celebrating Black History every month. And one of the things, I do a radio show on Thursday for senior citizens, and one of the things I said in last month's radio show, we do a 1 hour radio show from 12 to 1. It's called Soup and Salad with Seniors. And I stated last week that I was very glad that a family had decided to sue the Baltimore City Public School System, the City of Baltimore, the CEO of the Baltimore City Public School System, because I feel it's imperative for every group of people to not only understand but appreciate their own history. And I contend if you don't understand and don't appreciate your own history, you don't know the greatness of your people. And I think Baltimore City has done a great injustice by not having Black history, civics in the school system. The new CEO that we have now, I felt very disappointed in, because her predecessor was a Hispanic guy, and he put my booklet in the school system website, and that was African American Sheroes and Heroes Born in Baltimore City. And the reason I created that booklet about 15 years ago was that our children did not understand or appreciate the number of great people that have come through this city. And I figured the best way for me to tackle it is to have a little picture of the person that I wrote a bio on, and then put a little 3-sentence bio of who that person is. Unfortunately, the booklet is only on my website, which has maybe 247 individuals. And the last one that appeared on the school system, I think, was 237. But I would really encourage you to take a look at it. You may find some surprising individuals that their names and faces are there. But Baltimore City has a great history, and I think probably more than any time, we need to hear some good things about Baltimore. It's a really tough city. I've lived here all my life. I'm 71 years old. I came very close to death about a year and a half ago. I had a major stroke. Could not walk. I was in a wheelchair for 2 months. I could not talk. I don't know whether I talk well now or not, but I wasn't able to talk. And last year, I guess some of the consequences of having diabetes and high blood pressure, I started losing vision in my left eye. And I went to the Wilmer Clinic, and I can say today, I see better today than I did 20 years ago. So I know you don't discuss religion and faith in school. I just will say this. I know that there's a higher being, because I know I should not be here. I came very close to death. I lost sight. I could not walk. I'm not running too well. I don't think the Ravens would want me. But it's good to use a cane rather than use a wheelchair. But I want to say this to our young people. You are, from my vantage point, the most intelligent generation that we have ever had. Now, mind you, I think you talk more than you listen, and I think you need to listen more than you talk, but you're so intelligent. The things that you do, the things that you experience as young people, I'm encouraged just to sit and be here. I know it sounds like a cliche that, everybody comes and say they're so glad to be here. I'm not kidding. It's an honor for me to be here with you. And I know I need to shorten this up a little bit to give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have. But the other area that we need to deal with, because this is Black History Month, a group called ASALH. You need to look at ASALH. It's an organization that deals with the history of African Americans. And one of the things that I needed to do was, and this was about 15 years ago, I felt the necessity to stop seeing black men die at such an early age. Because for the most part, if you look up the history, African American males die more from issues that they could deal with and correct. And I created a group called Blue Suit. Yes, I am a Sigma, so I couldn't wear a red suit for the Kappa Alpha Psi. I couldn't wear a black suit for the Alphas, and I couldn't wear a purple suit for the Omegas or a brown suit for the Iotas. So I created, and I confess, I stole the idea from Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. They had red dress day. And I said, I got to do something to counter that. So I came up with Men's Blue Suit Health Awareness. And what I created for the city of Baltimore was a Men's Blue Suit weekend. And we had gone up to about 100 churches that were participating. We were talking about prostate cancer, breast cancer, you name a health issue, we were discussing it. And it happened during Sheila Dixon when she was mayor. She agreed to implement the program. And I think Joshua Sharpstein, who is now probably a state health person, he left, and then a woman came, and I said, this is going to be great. I got a woman mayor, and I got a woman health commissioner coming in, because my great relationship has always been with women. I'm someone that confessed. I was a member, a non-voting member of the National Organization of Women. I've been a member of the League of Women Voters. I was a member of the National Council of Negro Women. I probably have been a member of at least 5 women organizations. Probably because of the education of my mom. She told me that it's the woman that's the most important. Just don't tell your father. So I've always felt really close in dealing with women. When I want something done and I want something done right, and I know it takes holy heck from the men when I leave here. But I look to women. I like having women on my committee that get the things done. And then the guys, we fuss and fight, and then we go out later on and have a stronger than a Pepsi. I won't tell you what it is. But I just want to say to all of you, it's an honor for this brother to come here and talk. And I want to be able to answer any questions that you may have. I'm trying to think of anything that I did not touch on. Oh, the last thing, I'm a rabble-riser. I shake up the apple cart, as they would say. I do things that people would not predict that I'm doing. I'm trying to get a food market here, and I'm going to look up that the food market that Morgan State University is having. My community doesn't have a food market. But one of the things that I think is so important, and I have it here as my last issue, I try to attack issues that no one else would attack. And when we had the riots in Baltimore City, and those of you who know anything about Baltimore City, the damage that was done was not a major area in Penn North. That's where all the folks celebrated, and they took pictures. Let's just say, health challenges made him more challenging than he needed. But when we had the Freddie Gray riots, the community that I'm president of, Matthew Henson, received the most damage during the Freddie Gray riots. It wasn't at Penn North. It was 8 blocks below it going west. And that was the Easterwood community. We had 18 businesses that were damaged, and many of them damaged severely. But what I learned during that period of time, that you got to be careful who you celebrate. And I found that there was a statue in Baltimore City that was celebrating 2 Confederate soldiers. And I created heroes and sheroes born in Baltimore City to celebrate folks that had done well. And I said, why is there a statue of 2 people that not only lost the war, but these were racist? These were folks who had slaves, would do everything and anything to an African American. So I got my little small community group, and we went up on, I think it was July the 1st, 2015, and I called upon the mayor to tear down these 2 statues. And folks said, Doc, you must be crazy. They would probably kill you. I said, well, if there's a reason I got to leave this earth, let it be for something that was noteworthy. So there are a lot of states and counties that have taken down their Confederate statues, but through my leadership and my community's leadership, Matthew Henson, we were the community that got those 2 statues taken down, because I wanted to send a message to the Confederate sons and daughters that you should not be celebrating someone that lost a war. The Confederates lost the war. So why do we have 2 statues up here? So I can't take the blame for other statues being in other counties, but I do take the credit for taking down the 2 statues in Baltimore City, and I'm proud that we did it, because we should not be celebrating. But I also said we should not do damage to those statues. They are history. History can be good, bad, and indifferent. There needs to be an area where those statues need to be placed. Do not destroy them. And I said that on television. But we still got some more statues to take down. And I will close and say this, and now I'll let you ask any questions. We need to take down the FBI building in Washington, D.C. That was one of the homophobic, most racist people that ever been the head of an organization. I'm talking about J. Edgar Hoover. We need to look at what we have done in the area of history. And sadly enough, we have failed in teaching kids in Baltimore City the history, the great history of African Americans. Every ethnicity has some greatness in it, but I think we have failed our students in Baltimore City to educate them. So no question is a bad question. I hope I haven't bored you too long. I hope I haven't taken too much time. But I would love to answer any question. No question is a bad question. And Doc Cheatham definitely doesn't know it all. My claim to fame also is that I was the coordinator for the headquarters for the Million Man March. And that was one of the greatest things I felt I ever did. That I traveled around the world to get people to come to the Million Man March. I got to meet Minister Farrakhan. I got to meet Ben Chambers. I made him a Sigma. I was a Sigma. And it's just an honor to be here. And please ask any questions.
Identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Keishanae Simpson. I'm currently a senior political science student here at Morgan State. I wanted to ask, right now there seems to be, amongst young people, this big push away from voting. A lot of young people feel that we're wasting our vote, because even if we do vote, we might not get the changes that we want to see. When it comes to those situations in your experience, how would you counteract that mindset?
One, I would always listen to our youth, because oftentimes they have an insight that's sending us older people a message. If I were to look at this upcoming election, which is a gubernatorial election, but there are some people that are running in the city. I know that on a radio station I was on last week, I said to the citizens in Baltimore, most of you will be electing at least 15 out of 18 people that are coming for re-election. From my vantage point, when I look at my community, none of those 15 that are running for election deserve our vote. My elected officials that represent my neighborhood, and I live in zip code 21217, the highest crime area in the state of Maryland. We average 50 homicides a year. We average 50 homicides a year. We have 50 liquor stores in our neighborhood. We have 50 open-air drug markets. But young people send a message of things that they like and don't like. The most important thing is to understand, first and foremost, people died to give us the right to vote. But we have the right to not only better understand who's running, but then to put people out of office. And this election year that we have coming up, my suggestion is the majority of people running for re-election, kick them out. I got elected officials I haven't seen all year. I'm the head of one of the biggest community groups in the city. We didn't see any of our elected officials all year last year. They don't deserve our vote. So I think young people are right to understand that there is some hesitancy, but there got to be some people that you can vote for. But in the absence of that, run for office yourself. You might do a better job than whoever's in office.
Any other questions? Go ahead. Identify yourself, please.
My name is Dara Sanar, and I'm a sophomore business administration major, but I had a history teacher who today was amazing enough to recommend me to be here. Just wanted to ask you, Mr. Cheatham, if you could have done anything differently in your career, what would it be, if anything?
I would say be more involved in dealing with youth. I do pay for a Little League baseball team. I belong to a baseball league that's the oldest predominantly African American Little League baseball team for boys and girls in the United States. It's called James Moser Little League. I would say get more involved in the education of our children. I don't think, because I got involved in civil rights, I spent a little more than 50 years in civil rights. I worked for the federal government. But I think I should have done more in educating and mentoring young people. And I really appreciate that question.
Any other questions?
Here's your chance. You can shoot a bullet at me as long as it doesn't hit me. Yes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Karen Graham. I'm a junior political science major.
That's my subject, political science.
Earlier you mentioned that you gave up your presidency to run for office at the university. I was wondering, why did you find that black mistake?
Well, I had retired from the federal government, and I was so disappointed in the poor representation that my residents were having. I said, well, if it is to be, it begins with me, and I decided to run. That was probably the worst thing I could have ever done. Matter of fact, the guy that's in office, one of the guys that's in office right now, who beat me during that election, paid some guys to tear down my voting sign. And I'm saying, I only wanted one position out of 3, but they were tearing down my signs, giving my family death threats. And I said, you know what, I wanted to be an elected official to help my community. But it was not a sound decision. I wasn't going to spend my family's money to run. I was going to raise the money myself, but that was a wasted 2 years running for office. I could have done some more community work. And I love doing community work. At the end of the day, when you know that you have helped someone that may not have been successful if you didn't help, that's the pleasure that you get. I didn't get paid a cent heading up 3 civil rights groups. But at the end of the day, when you know that you got someone some heat in the house that didn't have it, there's an inner feeling that you get that you have done well. I'm trying to build a food market in my area. When I did run, one positive thing happened. I was in a predominantly white neighborhood where I was campaigning. This was Hamden area. I don't know whether anyone knows the Hamden area. Hamden is probably 90% white. The neighborhood that I'm in is 95% black, which is Eastwood. And I'm campaigning in the Hampton area because I wanted votes from everybody. I was going to be everybody's representative. And I'm hearing these kids calling my name, and mind you, I'm in Hampton. And I'm hearing, hey, Doc Cheatham. Hey, Doc Cheatham. I'm saying, these kids up in this neighborhood don't know me. Lo and behold, it was 3 of the children in my neighborhood had skateboarded all the way up to Hannah. And he said, well, Dr. Cheatham, what you doing there? I said, I'm running for office. We said, we need you to get elected because we need a skateboard. One of the commitments I gave to these children, I'm happy to say, this year, my neighborhood, as a result of Crazy Dr. Cheatham, we will build the first black skateboard park in the state of Maryland. That was, thank you. That was because those kids, which is my heart and soul, and I could have been a better father than I was, but I felt I needed to listen to the youth and try to do things for them. It cost us $650,000 to build the skateboard park. It is going to be in Easterwood Park, but you get satisfaction out of doing things for people. You know, money is good, and I'll close with this one. George Washington Carver, member Phi Beta Sigma fraternity, had a quote. It's not the amount of money you have in the bank. It's not the style of clothes you wear. It's not the type of automobile you drive. These things mean nothing. It's service. It's service that measures success. There have been hundreds, if not thousands, of millionaires, and you don't know hardly many of them. I definitely don't. But the people that I know and I remember the most are people that have served others. Those are the names that you remember. And that's how I would like to go down to be remembered. That Doc honestly tried to help people. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. Yes, ma'am.
I have several Dr. Cheatham, and I met you before, and I know most of you.
Don't hold that against me.
Well, today. So, you said that Maryland was the last state, one of the last states to ratify the right for blacks to vote.
Blacks and women.
Blacks and women.
Yes, ma'am.
You said it's separate. So, based on your experience of moving around Maryland and as long as you've been here in Maryland, why do you believe that's the case? What about Maryland makes it stand behind other states in doing it?
Well, Maryland had the nicety of being what was called a free state. But ironically enough, probably some of the, I would call it tough, to be nice. Some of the tough neighbors that we have, like, you know, I was a member of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. And of course, I studied organizations that I've headed up. And one of the most challenging times I would have was the death threats. I received 8 death threats. Came from the Daughters of the Confederacy, who every year that there was a Martin Luther King celebration, and a lot of people don't know this, every year that there was a Martin Luther King celebration, at where the Confederate statues were, that's where they celebrated against Martin Luther King. And I'm saying, you know, Baltimore had the nicety to have such a large number, especially of blacks, that were free. But I think some of the greatest challenges of any city happened here in Baltimore. Housing discrimination started in Baltimore. All right? Started in Baltimore. It was in 3 communities. I found out later it was 4 communities. The 3 communities was Reservoir Hill, Mount Royal, and Roland Park. They started housing discrimination, and you can check the book by Tara Patella. He writes about Not in My Neighborhood. There have been some great injustices perpetrated by residents in the state of Maryland and the city of Baltimore. And that's probably what was the incumbency why so many civil rights leaders and laws were built and legislation was passed, because there were just so many terrible things that were actually done here. You know, just about every type of discrimination you can think of, a bill or legislation was introduced here in the Baltimore area. And Howard is one of those, and I found out another area that I took over after the community moved out. I had a real close relationship with my Jewish brothers and sisters because many of them were still living in my community when I moved there. And they ended up moving to Easterwood neighborhood. And they moved up to the Park Heights neighborhood. I was so enthused about the relationship that I had with my Jewish brothers and sisters. I went to school with the understanding there was still a Jewish school, and that was Forest Park. But by the time I got to Forest Park, it only had about 20% white, and about 50% of them were Jewish. But Baltimore is a tough city. Historically, we have done awful in the area of crime. We've had more crime and violence done. It's just that it's heightened now. But we have an awful history here, but we got great people and great communities here. And I tell folks, it's a tough city, but if you can help, help. I refuse to move. My older brother, my younger sisters, they all moved out. But I told them I don't know whether or not they would ever bury me in the back of my yard. I said, but I'd like to be buried in Baltimore because I want to say he was a brother who decided to give his life and what time he has left on this earth to help people of all ethnicities. But that's a good question.
And another question that I had was what you just mentioned. Since you made the comment, and let me just say this with my students not from D.C. So I'm originally from Washington, D.C. I'm not from Baltimore. But my question for you from being an outsider of Baltimore is, you said that when we look at litigation, legislation, and leaders, that Baltimore City has more of that. So just to clarify that, is it because people from outside of Baltimore City saw what was happening and congregated here? Or are you talking about people who are born and raised?
Born and raised here. What I've seen in the few years I've been on this earth and looking at civil rights, and I had to study the groups that I headed up, was I found that many of the leaders that were coming from other areas were being mentored here. We had the Monumental Bar Association. The NAACP was formed as a result of the Naacp movement. Blacks and whites formed the NAACP. But when you look at the Naacp movement, that's where you will see that African Americans put together the Naacp movement. But before the Naacp movement was another organization. There was a group called the Brotherhood. The Brotherhood was really the forerunner to the Naacp movement. But all of those were here in Baltimore. You look at the Monumental Bar Association, one of the most successful bar associations, and not a bar being a drinking bar, a bar being a legislative bar. You had so many bills that were introduced. Thurgood Marshall used to live right in the neighborhood. Many of the great civil rights leaders, even folks like the lady who sat on the bus, she was mentored here by civil rights leaders here. Many of the civil rights leaders were brought to Baltimore for mentoring. My aunt, God rest her soul, and we did something for her that seems kind of crazy. My aunt worked for Ina Pratt Library. She was highly intelligent and decided she wanted to be a supervisor. They would not let her be a supervisor because she was African American. She decided to pick two attorneys, one was Thurgood Marshall, to represent her. Her name was Louise Kerr Hines. She sued Ina Pratt. She wasn't really suing Ina Pratt as much as she was suing the patrons that went to Ina Pratt. Because the patrons were saying, we don't want to have blacks running the library, so we're not going to patronize Ina Pratt. My aunt, Louise Kerr, sued Ina Pratt Library because it was against the law that someone could receive state or federal funds and secondarily discriminate. She won the lawsuit. The suit is called the Kerr Principle. The Kerr Principle is that you cannot receive state or federal funds and discriminate. They offered her the job after she won the lawsuit, and she told him to take the lawsuit and stick it. she wanted to know, that she had won, and in honor of her, my brother and I, we decided that's the first place we're going to work. We worked for Ena Pratt, and we let folks know, and Carla Hayden, she's over in D.C. now, she's the national librarian, but Carla Hayden used to have my aunt's picture up on the wall, because I told folks, I can't take any credit for being heavy in the civil rights. I got it from one, in the sense that, we all come from a higher being. We can debate upon whether it's a higher being or whatever. But I think the service that we render to one another is what's important. It could be your neighbor. We have a program called The Neighbor on Tuesday just to see how the seniors are doing. But I would say the most important thing in general is to treat people as you would like to be treated, but help mankind. There's so much help that needs to be rendered. It's inexcusable to have 16,000 vacant homes in Baltimore City, and we got homelessness. It's almost a contradiction. How do you have homelessness and got 16,000 vacant houses? Some of the things that are going on are unbelievable. But don't give up. Help mankind. I don't think God or whatever high being we look at, I don't think he makes mistakes or she makes mistakes. I got to be a little even with it, because I sometimes say she more than I do he. But we got to help one another, no matter where we are, what we're doing. But be careful, because it's tough out here now. It's real tough. I've never seen Baltimore City as bad as it is now. I've lived here all my life. I'm what we call a Baltimorean. But don't you call me that now. But that's what I call myself. But I love Baltimore. I love its people. I love the diversity that we have here. And I just hope the time that I still have left, I will still be able to help some people. Y'all got some good questions.
Hi, my name is Brittany Barber, and I'm the first student here, and I'm in the year. And my major is multi-platform reception.
Woo, that's heavy.
I wanted to piggyback off of what you were saying about acts of service. Do you have any organizations or anything that you can recommend to actually go and volunteer for? Like, I'm moving here, I'm from New York. I've been living here for 3 weeks now, and I know it's turned up like here, but I want to know how I can do a service and what I can do in order to have an impact on my youth.
Well, I'm going to say black girls vote. I've met some of those young ladies during the challenges that we had and putting together the HBCU. I got Rah group that supported the lawsuit that we had against the 4 schools. I was very impressed with the activity, the intellect that Black Girls Vote have. I was at a barber shop a few months ago, and one of the leaders of Black Girls Vote was in the barber shop. One of her relatives was the person that cuts hair. I would say get active in an organization that you can honestly see is helping. Not doing a lot of talking, because I think today, I guess the thing that discourages me the most, we got the best talk in this generation that we ever had. But at the end of the day, I'm going to say, well, what are they doing? We're having all of these challenges and problems, but I'm not seeing what's being done at the end of the day. There's so much that needs to be done. But I would say, join an organization that you feel comfortable with, that's not trying to take your money, not trying to get you to do things that you don't want to do. But at the end of the day, you can pat yourself on the back. And no, I'm not saying pat yourself on the back for that sake. But at the end of the day, you know that you have helped someone that otherwise may not have had the opportunity to do something or to get something or to receive something. It's service that measures success. It's good to have the money. I'm poor, always have been poor. And it's funny because I'm doing a radio show. The radio show costs. It comes on tomorrow at 12 noon. Don't tell folks I said WOLB, but I do support WEAA as well. But it's a radio show that costs money. And I tell folks, if you see Doc Cheatham and some senior citizens out on the corner and they washing windows, those are the new squeegee boys. I'm a little bit crazy. No, I'm a whole lot crazy. Yes. I'm loving these questions. Can I spend the night here?
Hi, my name is Nola Hill. I'm a sophomore political science major.
Yay! I'm president.
So you previously mentioned that you feel like Baltimore doesn't do a good job at integrating Black history into its education. So, I mean, personally, I feel like to most people, the topic of Black history and the Confederacy it's a very sensitive topic for most people. They don't want to address it. You know, there's some people in this country that feel like the Confederacy is kind of like their family history. So, I guess what I'm trying to ask is, how do you think Baltimore could do a better job at integrating the history of Black history into its education?
Well, history starts at the moment you were born. You know, you need to be able to educate